The morning sun cast its golden light over the narrow streets of the city, highlighting the chaos of life that never truly slept. Vendors called out the day's offerings, baskets of ripe mangoes, steaming cups of chai, and stacks of warm bread. Rickety bicycles dodged pedestrians, while cars honked their impatient horns at every chance. For most, this was just another ordinary morning. But for Maya, it was the start of yet another battle, one that required every ounce of strength, patience, and hope she had left in her weary body. Maya adjusted the sling holding her baby, Nina, tight against her chest. The tiny fingers curled around her blouse, occasionally tugging at the worn fabric as if to test whether the warmth was real. Nina had been restless through the night, her small cries echoing in the tiny apartment that Maya rented at the edge of the city. Her husband, Ravi, had died unexpectedly 6 months ago in a traffic accident, leaving Maya to navigate a world that seemed determined to overwhelm her. Every morning since, she had risen before dawn, prepared what little she could for Nina, and set out for the small public school where she taught. The journey was long, each step over the uneven pavement a reminder of the hardships she faced. Shoes with worn soles pressed against her feet, her bag of teaching materials bouncing against her hip with every stride. Yet Maya moved with purpose, the rhythm of her heartbeat matching her determination. She had a job to do, students to educate, and a child to protect. There was no room for despair. Not yet, anyway. She had learned long ago that worrying about what she lacked would not fill Nina's stomach or keep her warm at night. As she walked, she observed the city in quiet contemplation. The rich and the poor, the powerful and the invisible, moved past each other like parallel lines, so close in proximity, yet worlds apart. Across the river, beyond the towering skyscrapers and the neatly paved avenues, lay the opulent mansion of the Harrison family, a world Maya could only glimpse from the periphery. Gregory Harrison, the patriarch, was a man whose wealth dwarfed most of the city combined. His son, Ethan, was 7, curious, and untouched by the hardships Maya endured. But today, Maya would unknowingly cross paths with Ethan, a meeting that would forever change all their lives. At the school, Maya's students were already gathered, their chatter and laughter filling the small classroom with energy. Maya greeted each child with a warm smile, careful to conceal the fatigue she felt deep in her bones. Her life outside these walls was hard, but inside, she had the power to inspire, to teach, and to create a small bubble of joy amidst the chaos. Children like Amir and Lena depended on her not just for lessons in math or science, but for guidance, empathy, and reassurance. Maya had learned to balance the weight of her personal grief with the responsibility she carried for others. She had learned resilience. Yet as she stepped outside for her mid-morning break, the city's noises returned with a vengeance. Maya carried Nina down the narrow alley leading to the river, hoping that a little fresh air would calm the baby and provide a moment of respite. The river was a silver ribbon cutting through the city, deceptively calm on the surface, but hiding currents that could swallow a child in seconds. Today, the morning was deceptively serene. The water glistened under the sun, birds hovered over the surface, and the distant hum of city life faded against the gentle lapping of the river. Maya paused, adjusting the sling to ensure Nina was secure. She glanced at the water, observing how the sunlight danced and shimmered. She had walked this path countless times, always vigilant for dangers she had learned to anticipate. A fallen branch, a slippery stone, a stray bicycle on the riverbank. Any of these could spell disaster for the unwary. And as Maya's eyes scanned the water, she noticed something that immediately tightened her chest. A small figure near the riverbank, standing dangerously close to the edge. The child was Ethan Harrison, though Maya did not know his name yet. He was reaching for something, leaning precariously over the edge of the river. His tiny hands stretched out toward a floating object. A toy boat, perhaps, drifting tantalizingly close. He balanced on the slick stones, oblivious to the danger beneath him. Maya's heart leapt into her throat. She had seen children fall before, the consequences of curiosity and naivety all too real in her life. She could not allow this child to tumble in. But before she could even react, fate intervened. Ethan slipped. Time slowed in that instant. The boy's arms flailed, his face a portrait of pure terror. He toppled forward, plunging into the water with a splash that sent ripples racing across the river's surface. His cries echoed loudly, piercing Maya's very soul. The current grabbed him with merciless strength, pulling him under. He kicked frantically, trying to keep his head above water, but the river's force was relentless. Panic clawed at Maya, and instinct propelled her forward. She gripped Nina tighter, whispered soothing words, and ran toward the riverbank. Around her, life continued in a strange, distorted haze. Some bystanders had noticed the commotion but remained frozen, unsure of how to act. Others pulled out phones to film the event rather than intervene. The world seemed to have split into two realities, one where the child struggled, screaming for help, and another where the crowd hesitated, indecisive, unwilling to risk anything for someone else. It was a test, and Maya knew she could not wait. Her maternal instinct, sharpened by months of hardship and sleepless nights, demanded action. Stepping onto the wet stones at the river's edge, Maya's shoes slipped, sending a jolt of fear through her body. Nina squirmed slightly, sensing the tension, and Maya murmured reassurances, her voice trembling but firm. She surveyed the water, noting the strength of the current and the exact location of the child. Each heartbeat seemed to echo like a drum in her chest. There was no time to call for help. There was no guarantee anyone else would intervene. This was her moment. The responsibility fell squarely on her shoulders. Maya waded into the river, the cold water rising quickly. It lapped at her knees, then thighs, each step a battle against the pull of the current. Her muscles strained, her breath caught, but she pressed forward, determined to reach the boy before it was too late. Each splash brought her closer, and yet the river seemed determined to fight her every step. Nina's small body pressed against hers, the baby's cries soft and muffled, trusting her mother's strength and guidance. Maya's mind raced, calculating, adjusting, fighting every instinct, screaming for self-preservation. And then she saw him clearly, Ethan, struggling, exhausted, and terrified. His tiny limbs flailed, his eyes wide with fear. The river's current had swept him further downstream, and the rocks he had tried to cling to offered no purchase. Maya felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and determination that left no room for hesitation. She moved faster, ignoring the strain in her legs, the cold seeping into her bones, and the shouts of bystanders who now began to murmur in alarm. Reaching Ethan was no simple task. The water fought her at every turn, and the boy's panic made it difficult to grasp him safely. But Maya's arms were steady, her resolve unwavering. She extended a hand, calling out words of reassurance. "I've got you! Hold on! It's okay!" she shouted, her voice carrying across the river. Ethan reached out, fingers trembling, and their hands met in a grip of desperate trust. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the teacher and the child, suspended between life and death in the merciless current. With a deep inhale, Maya anchored herself against the riverbed and began to pull Ethan toward the bank. The current pulled at them both, threatening to topple her, but she refused to yield. Every step was a battle, every second a test of strength and will. Finally, she managed to drag him onto the grass, collapsing beside him, soaked and trembling, with Nina safely pressed to her chest. Ethan gasped, tears streaking his face, but alive. The crowd fell silent, shock and awe mingling on their faces. Some wept, others clapped, and a few knelt in relief. Maya's chest heaved, her own tears mingling with the river water that soaked her clothes. She had risked everything to save a child she had never met. And yet, despite exhaustion, fear, and pain, she felt a profound sense of purpose. She had acted not for recognition, not for reward, but because she could not do otherwise. The morning air by the river was deceptively calm. Sunlight glimmered on the water's surface, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves along the banks. For most, it was a serene scene, a perfect start to a day. For 7-year-old Ethan Harrison, it was an irresistible invitation to adventure. The boy had slipped away from the watchful eyes of his nannies and bodyguards, as children of privilege so often did, confident in his invincibility. He carried a small wooden boat, a toy that floated delicately in the water, bobbing along like a fragile vessel on the vast river. Ethan knelt at the edge of the bank, his fingers brushing the surface, eyes wide with fascination. He leaned further to reach it, oblivious to the slick stones beneath him, the subtle erosion of the bank, or the merciless pull of the water below. For a moment, he was lost in the world of imagination, a world where he was captain of a ship, sailing the high seas, fearless and free. But the world of imagination collided violently with reality when his foot slipped on a moss-covered stone. A shriek tore through the air. Ethan lost balance and toppled forward into the river. The water was shockingly cold, and the current grabbed him with a strength he had never known. Panic flooded his limbs. He kicked, splashed, and clawed at the water, trying desperately to keep his head above the surface. His screams echoed across the riverbanks, carried on the wind, yet seemingly unanswered. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to slow. The river that had been a source of fascination became a force of terror. Ethan's small hands grasped at the water, searching for something to hold on to. Stones were too slippery, branches too high, and the current too strong. Every attempt to find stability only made the water more relentless, pulling him further downstream, towards jagged rocks and unknown danger. The first shouts came from the distance, bystanders reacting too late, their voices drowned out by the roar of the current. A few bodyguards appeared, running toward the riverbank, but hesitation plagued them. One debated whether to throw a rope, another argued about the safest approach, while a third merely watched, frozen by fear and indecision. The scene, for them, was a logistical problem rather than a human emergency. Their training, their privilege, their fear of liability, all paralyzed them. The crowd was not much better. A handful of onlookers had gathered, some whispering instructions to each other, others holding their phones, filming the incident with detached curiosity. One woman muttered, "Someone should do something," yet no one stepped forward. The river's strength was frightening, and the consequences of action were unpredictable. Fear had replaced empathy. Ethan's cries grew louder, sharper, more desperate. His small frame flailed helplessly. Panic was etched into every line of his face, every movement of his arms and legs. The current pushed him further from the bank, and with each passing second, the danger intensified. His toy boat, once the object of fascination, floated away downstream, symbolizing the loss of control he now faced. From the edge of the river, Maya watched. She had been walking with Nina, her baby, along the riverbank. The serenity of her morning had been shattered in an instant by the sight of the struggling child. Her heart leapt, and a surge of protective instinct swept through her. Every maternal impulse screamed at her, "Act now, or it may be too late." Maya's mind raced. She assessed the river's current, the distance between her and the boy, and the safest path to reach him without putting herself or Nina at greater risk. She noted the hesitant bystanders and the panicked bodyguards, realizing that no one else would act in time. The responsibility, the danger, the urgency, all pressed upon her chest like a physical weight. She took a step forward, testing the water with her foot. The cold hit her immediately, but she pressed on. Her muscles tensed as she waded deeper, the river clawing at her legs, threatening to unbalance her. Nina stirred slightly in her sling, sensing the tension, and Maya murmured soft reassurances. "It's okay, love. Mama's got this." she whispered, her voice trembling with urgency, yet filled with determination. Meanwhile, Ethan struggled. The current had pulled him close to a whirlpool formed by rocks below the surface. He kicked frantically, his small body fighting the water with everything he had, yet the river seemed insatiable. The cold water sapped his strength, his arms trembling from the effort, his lungs burning from panic. Every second that passed was critical. From a distance, Gregory Harrison, Ethan's father, finally arrived on the scene. His luxury car screeched to a halt and he ran toward the riverbank, but even he hesitated when he saw the strength of the current and the fear in his son's eyes. The boy's life seemed beyond the reach of his wealth, his guards, his influence. Gregory's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of fear and disbelief. In that moment, he realized that not even his vast fortune could guarantee safety. Maya had reached the middle of the river now. Water churned around her legs, tugging her with the power of a small storm. Her breaths came in short, sharp bursts, and her arms ached from holding Nina close. Yet she pressed on, driven by instinct rather than thought. She kept her eyes locked on Ethan, her mind focused on one goal: reach him, save him, and make sure he survived. Ethan spotted her approaching, a figure moving steadily through the water like a guardian angel. His cries became more urgent, but there was a glimmer of hope now, a spark of trust. He stretched out his arms toward her, desperation etched into every line of his small frame. Maya responded, her hands reaching for him, gripping him with a firmness that promised safety. The river fought them both. Waves slammed into them, currents pulled in opposing directions, and rocks threatened to trip their fragile alliance. Yet Maya held Ethan securely, anchoring herself with her legs, and using every ounce of strength in her arms. She whispered words of reassurance, her voice carrying over the roar of the river. "I've got you. Stay with me. You're going to be okay." Time became a blur as the struggle continued. Every second was an eternity, every movement critical. Ethan's small body shook with fear, his lungs gasping for air, yet he trusted her. He wrapped his arms around her neck, clinging desperately. Maya adjusted Nina, keeping her safe while holding Ethan with both care and force. The maternal instinct burned fiercely within her, and the world narrowed to these three lives: the teacher, her child, and the billionaire's son. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was only moments, Maya found firm footing near the riverbank. Using every last ounce of her strength, she pulled Ethan up and onto solid ground. The three of them collapsed onto the grass, breathing heavily, soaked and trembling, but alive. Ethan's tears streamed down his face, mingling with the river water and mud. He clutched Maya's arm tightly, whispering, You saved me." Maya pressed him close, catching her own breath, her heart pounding like a drum. Nina cooed softly, her small hand touching Ethan's arm, an innocent acknowledgement of the life that had been spared. The river, once a source of terror, was now calm again. The danger passed, but the emotional impact lingered, reverberating through every witness present. The bystanders stared in awe, the bodyguards speechless, and Gregory Harrison, rushing up, was struck silent. In all his years of wealth, power, and control, he had never felt so powerless. And now, standing on the riverbank, witnessing a struggling teacher, so ordinary, so vulnerable, save his son, he felt a mixture of fear, gratitude, and moral awakening. For Maya, there was no triumph in her chest, only relief and a quiet satisfaction. She had done what had to be done, not for recognition, not for praise, but because it was the right thing. She had saved a life, and that act, simple and human, had shifted the balance of the world in that moment. The riverbank was alive with sound, but not with help. Instead, there were cries, gasps, and the cacophony of panic. Ethan's frantic splashes echoed off the water and rippled through the crowd gathered along the edge. His small hands clawed at the current, desperate to find anything to hold, while the river's relentless strength threatened to sweep him away with each second. The urgency in his cries cut through the morning air, a visceral reminder that a child's life hung precariously in balance. Maya, chest tight with fear yet fueled by instinct, had already waded into the water, gripping Nina securely against her body while keeping her eyes locked on Ethan. The baby, sensing tension in her mother, squirmed slightly, wailing softly. Each step Maya took into the river was a battle against both the elements and her own exhaustion. Her muscles burned, the cold seeped into her bones, and the water pulled at her clothes, dragging her backward with every movement. Yet she pressed forward, each motion purposeful, each heartbeat filled with determination. From the riverbank, the scene looked chaotic. The bodyguards, trained professionals expected to protect the child at all costs, were frozen in hesitation. One argued, "We need a rope." Another countered, "He'll panic if we throw anything. We might make it worse." A third simply held the boy's toy, staring helplessly at the water. Their indecision, normally unimaginable, had now become painfully real. Every second they wasted was a second closer to disaster. The onlookers fared no better. Some pointed and shouted suggestions that fell on deaf ears. Others captured the scene on their phones, documenting danger rather than alleviating it. "Someone get a net!" one woman yelled, though she did nothing herself. "Call the fire department!" another shouted, though her voice was swallowed by the river's roar. A kind of collective paralysis had set in, a terrifying reminder that people often fail to act when confronted with immediate danger. Meanwhile, Ethan's strength waned. The current had pushed him near jagged rocks halfway downstream, and every kick became more laborious, more desperate. His arms trembled as he fought the water, and his lungs burned from panic. His cries grew shriller, piercing the collective hesitation of the crowd like an urgent alarm. He was slipping away, both physically and metaphorically, and the world seemed determined to watch rather than intervene. Maya paused for a split second, assessing the current and Ethan's position. The water reached her thighs, tugging at her with alarming strength, but she could not hesitate. She whispered soft encouragements to both Ethan and Nina, her voice steady despite the pounding of her own heartbeat. "Stay with me, Ethan. I won't let you go. I've got you. Keep holding on." The spectators along the riverbank began to murmur nervously, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Isn't there someone supposed to be with him?" one asked. "Why hasn't anyone jumped in?" said another. The whispers grew louder, yet no one acted. Fear, indifference, and reliance on wealth had created a dangerous cocktail, all waiting for someone else to take the risk, while a life hung by a thread. Gregory Harrison, Ethan's father, had finally arrived, having been informed of the incident by a frantic aide. His luxury car screeched to a halt, tires skidding slightly on the gravel, and he ran toward the riverbank. But even he faltered when he saw the ferocity of the current and the apparent helplessness of the crowd. He shouted commands at his bodyguards, his voice cutting across the chaos, yet the guards froze, debating the safest approach instead of taking immediate action. The boy's life, for all their training, was still outside their control. Maya waded further into the river, ignoring the stares and doubts around her. Her wet clothes clung to her body, her arms ached from holding Nina close, and her legs burned from resisting the pull of the water. She was ordinary, vulnerable, and utterly human. Yet it was precisely this humanity that would make the difference. Every step brought her closer to Ethan, whose small body was trembling, energy fading, and panic escalating. The crowd began to panic further as Ethan's cries intensified. The sound was raw, desperate, and gut-wrenching, a stark contrast to the calculated hesitation of those who had the power to intervene. A mother in the crowd clutched her own child, whispering, "Why isn't anyone helping?" While a man muttered angrily, "He's a billionaire's kid. Why is it like this?" Yet fear kept them rooted in place. Maya reached a critical point in the river where the current churned violently around rocks and tree roots. The water was knee-deep, then waist-deep, and she could feel the pull threatening to topple her. She steadied herself, adjusting her grip on Nina, and reached out to Ethan. The boy saw her, his wide eyes glimmering with hope. He stretched his arms toward her, and Maya grasped his hands firmly. Their connection was instantaneous, a lifeline formed in seconds. Ethan's small fingers trembled against Maya's grip as he struggled to keep his head above water. The river tugged him violently, threatening to wrench him away, yet he trusted her implicitly, a trust born of desperation. Maya braced her legs against the riverbed, fighting the current with every ounce of strength in her body. Her lungs burned, her arms ached, and the cold sapped her energy, but she would not, could not, fail. The river became a battlefield. Waves slammed against Maya, threatening to knock her off balance. Rocks scraped her legs, mud sapped her footing, and the water rushed around her with relentless force. Yet she pressed on, one determined step at a time, her eyes never leaving Ethan's face. She whispered encouragements to the boy, her voice steady, her tone filled with absolute certainty. "You're safe now. I've got you. Keep holding on." The crowd watched in stunned silence. Some gasped, some cried, and others clutched their phones tighter, capturing the moment without moving. The bodyguards were speechless, their training useless against the raw courage of this ordinary woman who had dared to act when no one else would. Gregory Harrison's jaw tightened, a mix of fear and awe in his eyes. For the first time, he saw that wealth, power, and strategy could not replace courage and moral action. Ethan's energy was waning. He had been in the water for what felt like an eternity, his tiny body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Panic threatened to overwhelm him entirely, yet he clung to Maya, holding on as if she were the only anchor in a world that was rapidly slipping away. Maya adjusted her stance, pressing Nina closer to her chest, and braced against a submerged rock, using it as leverage to pull Ethan toward the shallows. The river, once beautiful and serene, had become a crucible. Maya fought against the current, against fatigue, against fear, against the instinct to retreat. Every muscle in her body screamed, every breath burned, but she refused to let go. She had committed herself fully to the life of this child and the safety of her own daughter. Failure was unthinkable. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was only minutes, Maya managed to guide Ethan to a safer part of the riverbank. He collapsed against her, shivering and sobbing, but alive. Nina nestled against her, her small face pressed against Maya's chest. The bystanders gasped, some cheering, some in disbelief. Maya had acted where all others hesitated. She had transformed ordinary courage into life-saving heroism. Gregory Harrison arrived fully at the scene, his eyes wide with shock and gratitude. He saw the soaked, trembling mother holding his son and his grandchild, and in that instant, something inside him shifted. Wealth and power had failed where humanity had succeeded. For the first time, he felt powerless, and in that powerlessness, he glimpsed something more important than money. The moral strength of someone willing to risk everything for another. Maya, exhausted and trembling, whispered to Ethan, "It's okay. You're safe now." He clung to her neck, tears streaming down his face. In that moment, the river's danger was behind them, but the impact of her courage would echo forever. Every witness, from fearful bodyguards to indifferent spectators, had seen the power of selfless action. And for Gregory Harrison, it was a lesson in humility and morality he would never forget. The river roared like a beast, its surface shimmering deceptively under the morning sun. To any ordinary onlooker, it was a scene of chaos and despair. A child trapped in a torrent, bodyguards frozen in indecision, and the crowd murmuring in shock and fear. To Maya, it was a call to action. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline surging through every vein. She tightened her grip on Nina, her baby, pressed close against her chest, feeling the tiny heart beating rapidly against her own. The world had narrowed into one urgent mission: save the boy. Ethan's small form floated and bobbed in the water, weak from panic and exhaustion. His cries were sharp, urgent, a plea that pierced Maya's very soul. She waded deeper, water lapping against her knees, then waist, the current tugging at her legs as though trying to pull her backward. With every step, she fought not just the river, but the internal fear that clawed at her mind. She had only her own strength, her courage, and her child with her. And yet, it was enough. It had to be enough. The bystanders' murmurs rose into frantic shouting. Some offered advice from a safe distance. "Grab a branch! Throw a rope!" Others merely watched, their faces pale with indecision. None dared move closer to the treacherous current. Even the bodyguards, professionals trained to protect Ethan at all costs, remained frozen, debating strategies and liabilities, paralyzed by fear. Maya saw them, recognized their helplessness, and knew she could not rely on anyone else. The responsibility was hers alone. Ethan struggled against the current, his tiny arms flailing as he tried to keep his head above water. Panic contorted his small body, tears streaming down his face as he gasped for air. Every second in the river was a battle for life. He kicked, splashed, and grasped at the water in desperate hope, yet it was futile. The force of the river was overwhelming. Maya reached him. Time seemed to slow in that instant. She extended her arms, gripping Ethan firmly. Her hands closed around his small, trembling fingers, and she whispered, "I've got you, Ethan. Hold on. I won't let go." Her voice carried both authority and reassurance, a lifeline in the chaos. Ethan's eyes widened in shock and recognition. He clung to her without hesitation, understanding instinctively that this ordinary woman had become his only hope. The current lashed at them, water crashing over Maya's arms and chest. She adjusted her stance, planting her feet firmly against the riverbed, struggling to maintain balance. Nina squirmed slightly against her, sensing tension, and Maya murmured softly to her, "Stay calm, love. Mama's got you." Her words were almost lost amidst the roar of the river, but they steadied both her and the child. With Ethan in her arms and Nina securely held, Maya began the treacherous journey back to the riverbank. Each step was a battle. Rocks threatened to trip her, and the river clawed at her legs with relentless force. Her clothes were soaked, water chilling her to the bone, yet she pressed forward with determination that refused to yield. The world around her blurred, the panic of the crowd, the frozen bodyguards, the distant shouting, all faded into insignificance. There was only the boy in her arms and the baby against her chest. Ethan's strength was waning. His small body trembled violently, limbs heavy with exhaustion. Maya could feel his fear, his trust, his desperate need for safety. She whispered encouragements to him, each word deliberate, each breath a promise of protection. "You're safe now. I'm here. Keep holding on. Just a little more. We're almost there." The words were simple, yet in them lay the weight of maternal courage and unwavering resolve. The river pulled with renewed strength, attempting to drag both women and child back into its cold embrace. Maya stumbled, one foot slipping on a submerged rock. Panic threatened to rise, but she anchored herself with sheer determination, gripping Ethan tightly, pressing Nina closer, and planting her feet again. Her muscles screamed in protest, every step a struggle against fatigue and fear, yet she refused to falter. The crowd watched in stunned silence, awe and disbelief mixing with fear. Some people clutched their own children, realizing in that moment how fragile life could be. The bodyguards finally attempted to wade in, but the path had been cleared by Maya's courage. She had shown what human determination could accomplish when all else failed. Finally, after moments that felt like eternity, Maya reached the river's edge. She stumbled onto the wet grass, collapsing but not releasing her grip on Ethan or Nina. The boy gasped for air, tears streaming down his face, but alive. He clung to Maya, wrapping his small arms around her neck, as if she were the only thing in the world keeping him tethered to safety. Nina nestled against her chest, content and secure, oblivious to the danger that had passed. The river, once a source of terror, was now behind them, the danger averted by sheer courage and selflessness. The bystanders erupted into shocked applause and relieved gasps. Phones captured the moment, but no recording could ever capture the depth of fear, the intensity of maternal instinct, or the heroism displayed. Maya lay on the grass, trembling, soaked and exhausted, yet filled with a profound sense of purpose. She had acted not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was necessary, because it was right. Ethan looked up at her, his small face streaked with tears, and whispered, You saved me." His voice carried the raw emotion of someone who had stared death in the face and survived. Maya pressed a hand to his wet hair, murmuring, "It's okay now. You're safe." He clung tighter, refusing to let go. In that grip, Maya felt the emotional weight of the act, the unspoken acknowledgement of courage and compassion. Gregory Harrison finally reached the riverbank. He had watched helplessly from a distance, his vast wealth useless against the force of the river. Seeing Maya, ordinary and vulnerable, hold his son and his grandchild, he felt a mix of fear, awe, and profound gratitude. For the first time, he understood that money could not buy courage, and power could not replace human moral strength. The child's trust, the mother's instinct, and the selfless bravery displayed in that moment created a profound emotional resonance. Maya's act transcended social boundaries, showing that heroism was not confined to wealth or authority. Even the bystanders, previously paralyzed by fear and indecision, felt a spark of recognition. That courage and compassion often come from the most unexpected places. As Ethan finally relaxed, clinging to Maya's neck, the reality of what had just occurred began to settle in. The boy's sobs mixed with relief, gratitude, and lingering fear. Nina cooed softly, touching Ethan's arm, a small, innocent gesture acknowledging the shared trauma. Maya held both children close, breathing heavily, heart pounding, and tears streaming down her face. The scene along the riverbank would be remembered for years, not for the indecision of the bodyguards, nor for the distant presence of a wealthy father, but for the selfless bravery of a struggling mother and teacher who had risked her life to save another. Maya had demonstrated the kind of courage that cannot be taught, bought, or commanded. Courage born from empathy, love, and moral conviction. The chaos of the riverbank slowly faded as Ethan clung to Maya, his small body trembling but alive, and Nina nestled safely against her chest. For a few precious moments, the world seemed to pause. Water dripped from Maya's hair and clothes, mud stained her shoes and dress, and yet she exuded a quiet, unshakable strength. Her courage had not just saved a life, it had revealed something deeper, something money could never purchase. Gregory Harrison, the billionaire father of the boy she had saved, finally approached. He had arrived late, blocked by traffic, bystanders, and the inevitable chaos that surrounds those who live in a gilded world. But now he stood at the edge of the river, observing the aftermath with a mixture of awe, fear, and something unfamiliar: humility. He saw Maya's soaked, exhausted form holding his son tightly. He saw Ethan's small arms wrapped around her neck, tears streaking his cheeks, and the tiny baby clinging to her chest, unharmed. In that image, Gregory understood something profound. His wealth, his bodyguards, his cars, and his sprawling mansion had been powerless in the face of raw courage. And in that moment, he realized the limitations of privilege. Gregory took a step forward, hesitating. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers filling the air. It was her. She saved him, someone murmured. He swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. The ground beneath his feet no longer felt solid. He had witnessed firsthand the fragility of life and the power of human determination. The boy he had adored, protected, and provided for had nearly been lost, not to fate, not to chance, but to the cruel indifference of a world that often prioritized comfort over action. For years, Gregory had prided himself on control. Wealth had bought him influence, security, and obedience. His son was wrapped in layers of protection, his life meticulously planned and safeguarded. And yet, in one terrifying instant, all that preparation had failed. Only Maya, a struggling teacher, a mother with nothing but her child and her courage, had been able to intervene. He approached her cautiously, not out of fear of her, but out of reverence for what she had done. "Maya," he said, his voice trembling slightly. His usual commanding tone was gone, replaced by genuine vulnerability. She looked up, water and mud streaking her face, exhaustion and relief etched into every line. Gregory's eyes softened as he took in her presence. For the first time, he saw beyond social status, beyond appearances, beyond the hierarchy of wealth. He saw a human being, a mother, a hero, a person who had acted without expectation of reward, without hesitation, without fear of failure. He felt a pang of shame for the years he had relied on money and power as a measure of worth, forgetting the essential value of courage and compassion. I don't know how to thank you," he admitted, words halting and sincere. He reached for his son, but Ethan did not want to leave Maya. The boy clung to her, looking up at Gregory with tears in his eyes, his small voice trembling. "Papa, she saved me. She kept me safe." Gregory knelt beside Ethan, his gaze shifting between the boy and Maya. The depth of trust and gratitude in his son's eyes pierced him more profoundly than any business success, any financial achievement, any accolade he had ever earned. For the first time, Gregory understood that true value was measured not in wealth, but in moral courage, selflessness, and love. Maya, still holding Nina, spoke softly. "He's safe now. That's all that matters." There was no pride in her voice, no demand for recognition. Only truth, only humility. And yet, in that humility, she wielded a power far greater than money. She had changed lives in a moment, reshaping priorities, recalibrating the moral compass of a man who had believed himself untouchable. The crowd began to disperse slowly, whispers of admiration following them. Yet Gregory remained, silent, processing the weight of the moment. He realized that he had been blind in many ways, not in wealth or intellect, but in understanding the human heart. He had taught his son etiquette, responsibility, and manners, but he had neglected to teach him compassion, trust, and courage, the very virtues that had saved Ethan's life. Gregory's mind replayed the rescue over and over. Maya wading through the river with Nina pressed against her chest, her determination unyielding, her focus absolute. Every step, every word of reassurance, every act of bravery had been a revelation. His heart, long hardened by business and responsibility, softened in the presence of such undeniable humanity. He realized he had much to learn. For too long he had equated protection with isolation, safety with control, and love with provision. Maya had shown him that true protection was not in walls, guards, or wealth, but in courage, care, and moral action. He understood that she had risked everything, not for recognition, not for reward, but simply because it was right. That realization shook him profoundly. Gregory reached out to Maya, offering his hand in gratitude. She hesitated briefly, then accepted it. In that handshake there was no hierarchy, no patronage, only recognition of courage and integrity. He whispered, "I don't know what I could have done without you." Maya smiled faintly, brushing mud from her clothes. "You would have done what anyone should do, eventually. But I couldn't wait." Some things can't wait. Her words carried weight beyond their simplicity. They were a lesson in responsibility, courage, and moral clarity. Gregory watched as Ethan clung to Maya, his small fists gripping her clothes. He saw the bond that had formed, a bond that money could not buy, influence could not manipulate. He realized in that moment that his son had chosen not luxury or material comfort, but trust, safety, and love. He felt a seed of humility take root, a recognition that the world he had built was incomplete without the virtues he had overlooked. For hours afterward, Gregory could not stop thinking about the event. He replayed every moment of Maya's bravery, every calculated risk she had taken, every second she had held his son above the water. He knew that her courage was not a singular act. It was an extension of her character, her humanity, her values. He realized that the qualities he had admired in others, loyalty, discipline, obedience, paled in comparison to the courage she had displayed. That night, Gregory sat in his study, staring at the city skyline, reflecting on the day's events. The weight of responsibility he had always carried seemed different now. He understood that wealth alone could not solve every problem, that power could not ensure safety, and that true leadership required moral vision as much as financial acumen. Maya had demonstrated the moral power that wealth could not buy, the power to act selflessly in the face of danger. As he stared at the glass of whiskey in his hand, Gregory made a silent vow. He would ensure that his son understood the importance of compassion, courage, and integrity. He would recognize and honor those who acted from moral conviction rather than social status. And he would begin to reassess the walls he had built around his family, walls of privilege, isolation, and fear, and replace them with trust, empathy, and moral guidance. Maya, meanwhile, had returned home with Nina, exhausted yet fulfilled. She did not know the depth of the impact she had on Gregory, nor the internal transformation her actions had sparked. She had acted without expectation, motivated solely by the instinct to protect life. And yet, unknowingly, she had reshaped a family, awakened a father, and planted the seeds of change that would reverberate for years to come. In the days that followed, Gregory observed Maya differently. He no longer saw her as just a struggling teacher, a mother trying to make ends meet. He saw her moral power, her courage, and her unwavering dedication. He realized that heroism often comes from those who have little, yet give everything. And he began to see the limitations of his own wealth and status, how little it mattered in moments that required true courage. This awareness transformed him gradually. He began to consult Maya on matters beyond the superficial roles of teacher or caretaker. He listened, considered, and reflected on her perspectives. For the first time in years, Gregory questioned his assumptions, his reliance on wealth, and his definitions of value. He recognized that character, integrity, and courage were more powerful than influence, money, or control. The morning sun streamed through the grand windows of the Harrison mansion, its golden light dancing across polished marble floors and ornate furnishings. But this morning, the house felt different, not just because of the light, but because of the quiet, profound shift in its heartbeat. Maya walked through the vast halls, Nina secure against her chest, and felt something she hadn't felt before in this place, a sense of belonging. The mansion was no longer an intimidating fortress of wealth and status. It had become a home, infused with gratitude, respect, and newfound warmth. Ethan ran ahead, his small feet pattering across the floor, laughter spilling from him like sunlight itself. He was no longer the frightened child who had clung desperately to Maya by the river. He was full of energy, joy, and trust. His small hands reached out for her repeatedly as he darted from room to room, eager to share the small victories of the day, a drawing he had made, a puzzle he had solved, a story he wanted to tell. Maya followed at a steady pace, catching glimpses of Gregory Harrison watching silently from the study doorway, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing across his lips. The transformation in Gregory was subtle, yet undeniable. Once a man whose presence inspired fear and respect, he now exuded a new aura, one of humility, attentiveness, and moral curiosity. He had witnessed courage and selflessness that no amount of wealth or authority could command. In Maya, he saw not just the teacher who had saved his son's life, but a human being whose integrity, determination, and maternal love had forced him to confront his own limitations and assumptions. Breakfast that morning was unusually lively. Ethan sat at the table with a plate of pancakes, his laughter filling the room, while Nina gurgled happily in Maya's arms. Gregory poured himself a cup of coffee, observing them silently. For months, perhaps years, he had missed the sound of joy in his home, the warmth of genuine connection. Today it felt different. Maya's presence had created ripples of life that no wealth or power could have manufactured. Maya, for her part, navigated the household with quiet confidence. She was no longer just a visitor, a hired teacher, or a caretaker. She had earned the respect and trust of the children and, increasingly, the adults around her. Her influence was subtle but profound. She spoke with patience, nurtured curiosity, and modeled kindness in ways that challenged the rigid routines of the Harrison household. She did not flaunt her impact. She simply acted with consistency, compassion, and courage. As the days turned into weeks, the household began to change. The children's laughter was more frequent, their education more engaging, and their sense of security stronger. Ethan, once withdrawn and anxious, now approached challenges with confidence, inspired by Maya's calm guidance and the example of bravery she had demonstrated at the river. Nina, too, thrived, her growth and curiosity nurtured in an environment that had once seemed distant and unwelcoming. Even the staff began to notice the difference. They observed Maya's interactions with the children, noting her patience, her fairness, and her unwavering moral compass. Gossip and envy that had once colored the household began to fade as her influence reshaped the culture. The house was no longer just a showcase of wealth and status. It had become a living, breathing community where courage, kindness, and mutual respect mattered as much as obedience and protocol. Gregory found himself seeking Maya's perspective on matters beyond childcare and schooling. He began asking her opinion on ethical decisions regarding the family's charitable work, educational initiatives, and community involvement. He realized that her insights were grounded not in theory, but in lived experience, moral courage, and an understanding of human vulnerability. Maya's voice had become a compass, guiding not just the children but Gregory himself toward a broader, more compassionate worldview. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden reflections across the marble floors, Gregory called Maya to the study. She entered cautiously, Nina asleep in her arms. Gregory gestured for her to sit. He poured a drink, his hands slightly trembling, a sign of the emotional weight he carried. "Maya," he began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. What you did for Ethan, for Nina, for all of us. It's changed me. It's changed how I see the world, and how I see my family." He paused, searching for words. "I don't want you to remain just a visitor or a teacher. I want you to be part of this family, truly part of it, if you'll allow me." Maya's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise, humility, and cautious hope washing over her. She had never imagined that her act of courage, her instinctive choice to save a child she barely knew, would lead to such recognition and inclusion. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I'm just a mother trying to protect my child and your son," she whispered. Gregory shook his head, a faint smile breaking through his usual stoicism. "You are more than that. You've shown courage, integrity, and selflessness that no amount of wealth or authority could buy. That is the kind of strength I want in my family. And I want to learn from you." Maya's heart swelled, tears welling in her eyes. She had acted with no expectation of reward, yet here it was, an acknowledgement that went far beyond words. It was the recognition of moral power, the kind of respect that transcends status, and the promise of belonging that she had long yearned for. Over the following months, Maya's integration into the Harrison household was complete. She was no longer simply a teacher or caretaker. She became a moral anchor, a guiding presence, and a trusted member of the family. Gregory's respect for her grew, and he increasingly deferred to her judgment in matters both practical and ethical. The children thrived under her care, their lives enriched by the lessons of courage, kindness, and moral responsibility that she embodied. The transformation extended beyond the household. Gregory, inspired by Maya's example, began supporting initiatives that aligned with her values. Educational programs for underprivileged children, community outreach, and ethical investment strategies became central to his personal and professional life. Maya's influence, born from a single act of bravery, reshaped not just a family, but the very priorities of a man who had long been defined by wealth and control. Ethan, in particular, flourished. He often spoke of Maya with reverence, recounting the day she had saved him from the river to anyone who would listen. He learned lessons of courage, empathy, and responsibility from her daily, understanding that true strength was not in power or wealth, but in character and moral conviction. Nina, too, grew up in an environment of warmth, security, and ethical guidance, her development shaped by the presence of a mother who embodied the values she wished to impart. Even the wider community took notice. Stories of Maya's bravery, initially shared in hushed tones, became tales of inspiration. Her courage, selflessness, and moral integrity resonated across social divides, highlighting the universal truth that heroism is not confined by wealth, status, or circumstance. Maya had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary impact through acts of courage and compassion. The Harrison household, once characterized by rigid hierarchy, isolation, and the cold trappings of wealth, had become a home filled with laughter, warmth, and moral clarity. Maya's presence ensured that courage, kindness, and integrity were as central to the family as wealth had once been. Gregory, once a man of fear and control, now recognized the true value of human connection, moral courage, and selfless action. On quiet evenings, Gregory would often watch Maya with the children, observing her patience, her guidance, and her unwavering moral compass. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect, recognizing that her influence had changed the course of his family's life. He no longer saw himself as the sole authority. He understood that true leadership involved listening, learning, and respecting those whose courage and values exceeded his own. Maya, meanwhile, found a new sense of purpose. Her bravery at the river had not only saved a life, it had reshaped a family, inspired a man of influence, and created a lasting legacy of moral courage. She had discovered that acts of selflessness, no matter how small or risky, could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined. She embraced her new role with humility, wisdom, and unwavering commitment, ensuring that the values she lived by continued to shape the lives of those around her. The river incident, once a moment of terror, became a defining chapter in their lives. It was a story of courage, love, and moral power, a story that demonstrated the profound impact of selflessness, the strength of maternal instinct, and the transformative power of recognizing the moral courage in others. As the sun set over the mansion, its golden rays illuminating the smiling faces of children and the proud, humbled gaze of a father, Maya held Nina close, Ethan at her side, and felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had risked everything, and in doing so had gained something far greater than recognition or reward: belonging, purpose, and the knowledge that true heroism is measured not by wealth or power, but by the courage to act selflessly in the face of danger. In the heart of the Harrison mansion, wealth and power remained, but they were no longer the defining forces. Instead, courage, compassion, and integrity shaped the family's life. Maya's influence endured in every lesson taught, every act of kindness, and every moment of moral clarity. The household had been transformed, not by money or authority, but by one mother's brave choice to act when it truly mattered.